Now, as we reported earlier, another combat death announced by the IDF today. That brings to 134 the number of soldiers who have fallen since the ground operation started. But we should note that since October 7th, a total of over 460 young Israelis on active service in the IDF have made the ultimate sacrifice of their lives in defense of their country and their countrymen and women. Now, the example was set on that very first day when many soldiers were rushed into the war zone of that Gaza border with no real preparation, many with no real idea of the scale of the enemy they were facing there, and ended up laying down their lives in the opening hours of the war against Hamas. Now, one of them was Staff Sergeant Ofek Rousso, a fighter and medic in the Navy's elite Shayetet 13 unit, who just a week after celebrating his 21st birthday found themselves in the thick of the battle of Kibbutz Be'eri, and unfortunately perished heroically, I should say. And here to talk more about that is Dotan Russell. He is the uncle of Ofek Rousso, I'm sorry. He is the uncle of Ofek Rousso, and he joins us from Calgary, Canada. Dotan, thank you for joining us. First of all, tell us about your nephew, a little about him, and a little about, and somewhat about what you know what happened on to him, how he acted on October 7th.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me on this show and for giving me the opportunity to speak about my nephew, Ofek Rousso. Ofek was only 21 when he was killed on October 7. That day, that terrible Saturday, he stayed in base on call. This is something that they do as a commando soldier, stay on base on weekends. So in case something happens and there's a need for a military operation, usually there's no need for such, but that wasn't the case on Saturday. He and two of his fellow soldiers were called to the scene of death every morning of that Saturday when the news just came out. And it was actually, as you mentioned, there was a big mess, a big chaos. Nobody knew really what was going on. On the way from their base to those villages surrounding Gaza, they were informed of what was going on. And when they arrived, their task was to move from one house to the other and rescue families, elderly people, children, women from being raped, murdered, burned alive, and so on. As one of his friends who spent those hours with him told us during the Shiva, the first house that they got in, the first door they opened, they saw parents and three little children lying on the floor after being shot. This was the moment when they actually realized where they got into. And in the following hours, they succeeded in rescue dozens of families, dozens of people from being slaughtered by these barbaric murderers, Hamas terrorists. From the stories that were told again during the Shiva, those people who were rescued were so emotional. They considered them to be like angels who came from the sky to rescue them. They were hugging them and they were expressing their emotions. But Ofek and his friends didn't even have the time to dedicate themselves, even not for a second, to those people because they had to rush from one house to the other. Instead, the following hours, they were combating those terrorists. There were very few in number against hundreds of terrorists. And that night, around 2 a.m., when Ofek was hiding behind a temporary shelter because there was such a heavy fire all around, there was a call for assistance, medical assistance for an officer who was severely injured. Ofek, without any hesitation, although the fire was tremendous, as his friend told us, it was impossible even to put the finger out of this shelter. Ofek jumped over a fence and ran towards him, trying to provide him with this assistance, and then he was shot and killed on the spot while his body was saved this officers from death. And again, a few weeks after, this officer came to Ofek's parents' house, Yaniv and Fanny and Inbar, his sister. It was a very emotional meeting because it was very clear to everybody that this officer could be there and attend this meeting only because of Ofek's sacrifice. ultimate sacrifice.
Right, and Ofek served in Shayetet 13. I mean, for those who don't know, that's the Navy's elite commando. He's really one of the top, even I would say 2 or 3 commando units. Certainly his family knew that he might be involved in risky missions. I wonder how they're dealing with it, because this is a situation that began on October 7th, and since then, unfortunately, many more families with men and women serving on the battlefield in Gaza and also along the northern border have had to deal with. How is the Rousso family dealing with the circumstances and consequences of this?
Yes, well, as you mentioned, it's been said that God is taking the very best of the young people back to. I think Ofek is a pure example to illustrate this. He was killed just 4 months after he finished his commando Navy SEAL training. This is extremely, extremely challenging unit, maybe the most difficult one out of all the IDF units. It requires almost unimaginably physical and mental capabilities and strength. They deal with tremendous cold, very strict discipline, and physical challenges. There are hundreds, maybe more than hundreds, that apply to this unit every year, and only few end after 2 years. So for this, you need to have a very, very unique character. You need to be a real one of a kind in many ways. And Ofek, in that sense, I think, was this one of a kind. From a very early age, he was very dedicated for anything he put into his mind in terms of music, karate. He trained in karate, and he was actually participating in international competitions. He was doing professional skateboard, and eventually he committed himself to serve in this unit in the Shayetet 13. But maybe more than anything else, what requires is a very strong sense of ethical values and personality. He, at the age of 21, actually started this training at the age of 18, when his fellow young men around the world are occupied mainly with going to parties, enjoying their time, meeting the new girlfriends. He and his friends were giving so much, sacrificing so much for what they believed to was justifiable cause, the people, the nation, and he was willing to go through all this hardness and eventually sacrificing his life for such an heroic event. So you were asking about his family. This is an unbearable loss and pain, again, for Inbar, his sister, for his parents, Yaniv and Fanny, for his sweet girlfriend, Ronnie. There is some comfort in the knowledge that he sacrificed himself for saving so many lives. This is not just a slogan. There are many people around us now at this very moment, young people, elderly people, this officer, are alive thanks to him. They will continue with their life.
Dotan, I wanted to, sorry to interrupt, I wanted to ask you, because I did read an eloquent piece you wrote in the Israeli press. For those who don't know, I learned you're a professor, I believe, stuck with philosophy and politics, so you could certainly bring a wider perspective to that kind of sacrifice and how it relates to what Israel is facing. And I wonder if you could give us a little, maybe give us a little insight, or your own insight through what you've experienced.
Yes, I think Ofek is a pure example of the spirit of the Israeli people from a very early age, and the sense of commitment to their people, to their nation, their willingness to go through all this harshness. And as you mentioned, is of course is the most dear to us, but there are hundreds of others who sacrifice their life and continue to sacrifice their life daily. There are dozens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of soldiers at this very moment who are fighting in Gaza and in the north of Israel, knowing that they're risking their life. They're doing it voluntarily. They're doing it with all their passion and their strong belief that they're doing the right thing for their own people. And I think this is something that tells the story of the Jewish people, tells the story of the Israeli people. There are disadvantages of, for Israelis like any other nation, but there's one thing that definitely defines them. In times of trouble, they are just like one family, and they all consider themselves to be responsible for one another. They have this very strong sense of solidarity one another, and again from a very early age. And Ofek is a pure example for that. I think his heroic sacrifice should really serve as a role model for people not only in Israel, around the world as well, for young people to what a person can actually bring himself and become if he's willing to follow such attitude, such high moral standards, and so on. This is a very heroic story, which like in the books, and that is why I'm here, and that is why I'm telling you, and I hope it will be also heard and learned all over as it should be.
All right, Ofek Rousso, we certainly join you and your family in the mourning of your nephew. May his memory be a blessing. Ofek, his name, that means horizon in Hebrew, and hopefully his sacrifice and those of so many of these young men and women will lead to a brighter day, new day for Israel and the Jewish people. Thank you so much for joining us on I-24 News.
Thank you so much for having me.